We're down to the final four. One historic and decorated franchise in the Boston Celtics, chasing number 18 if they can get it done. But the other three teams, the Indiana Pacers and the Timberwolves, have never raised the Larry O'Brien. The Mavericks have in one of the most legendary playoff runs ever, but that was over 10 years ago in 2011. Bakari, this is one of the most interesting Final Fours we've had in a long time. And I feel like there's definitely a lot of different ways that this can go. So, of course, Bakari's joining the show. Today, we're doing everything conference finals, predictions, top 10 players, power rankings, everything. So, if you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Let's get into it here. The first matchup, the 3 seed, Minnesota Timberwolves. First time they've been here in over 20 years since, of course, Kevin Garnett was the MVP of the league. They face the 5 seed Dallas Mavericks. In this top box here, you'll see their overall record from regular season and postseason. And in the second one, you'll see just their playoff record. And of course, their playoff offensive rating, defensive rating, all of that good stuff. Bakari, again, welcome to the show. And your thoughts about this matchup. Don't have to give us our prediction yet, but just your overall outlook going into this series.
Yeah, I think this is probably going to be one of the more entertaining conference finals matchups in the last few years. And the thing about these teams is, you got like it's weird because you have those players like Karl Anthony Towns who have never really won in their career in this position. So now you want to see how they're going to be. And what Cat's been in the league probably 8-9 years already. So and Luka obviously has been to the Western Conference Finals before, but he had absolutely no help against a Warriors team that went on to win a ring. So these are two different teams on a mission. Not to mention Kyrie is trying to get his first ring without LeBron. These are two different teams on a mission. This should be very fun matchup. Can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, no, I think I'll ask you this. Who's going to be the X factor? Because we talked about it briefly before the show. Of course, Luka's health is obviously, I think, the biggest X factor is, how close to 100% is he going to be? I know everybody's kind of dealing with injuries, but maybe nobody more so than Luka Doncic at this point in the season, especially after being hit sticked and tackled every single play by Lou Dort last series, right? They were playing football while the others were playing basketball. But who's going to be the X factor for you? Is it going to be a Mavericks player, a Timberwolves player? Personally, I think it could be a guy like Rudy Gobert, because if he can not get played off the court like he kind of did last series, this series he doesn't have to worry about Nikola Jokic. This series he has to worry about Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, two solid bigs, but they are miles and leagues away collectively from a guy like Nikola Jokic. So I think if Rudy Gobert can come out and be aggressive offensively, I think that could be that X factor for the Timberwolves to not only win this series, but win it pretty quickly. But your thoughts here. Who's the X factor in this series?
Actually, I'm gonna keep it general. I'm gonna say like the sixth man. So like Naz Reid and Tim Hardaway Jr. for both of the teams, respectively. I think if Naz Reid can come out and deliver, I mean, he played a huge role in that series against the Nuggets. If he can come out and do that again this series, because we know the one thing about the Timberwolves is their defense is amazing. But sometimes their offense struggles, and if Naz Reid can kind of help take that lift off of Ant's shoulders, and if Cat's struggling, if Naz Reid can come in and drop about, maybe just give you a game where he has 20 or just like average like 15 for the series, I think that'll be very good for the Timberwolves. Not to mention Naz Reid is a little bit more versatile on the defensive end than Rudy is. So if Rudy does happen to get played off the court, I think Naz Reid will be able to step up in that role. And Tim Hardaway Jr., I mean, he's been struggling all playoffs. So if he can come in and the focus from the Timberwolves is going to be on Luka and Kyrie, if Tim Hardaway Jr., another player who come in and create his own shot, can start, shooting a higher percentage and getting better looks, I think that'll benefit the Mavs greatly, because you have two generational scorers who are going to be guarded very tightly in the series. So it's going to be up to Tim Hardaway Jr. and some of those other supporting casts to be able to get their own shots and their own open looks if they want to win this series.
Yeah, there's rumors going around, Bakar. There's a lot of discussion. Is this series going to determine who the next face of the league is? Of course, LeBron, KD, Steph Curry, they're all getting older, and they'll only have probably about 2 to 3 years left, at least at their highest level. I'll say that they're probably only going downhill from here. Maybe not Steph Curry because he's Steph Curry. But on one side you have Anthony Edwards. A lot of people like him. A lot of people compare him to Michael Jordan. But then you have Luka Doncic, of course, a European guy. I don't know if a European player has ever been the face of the league. Well, Ant, of course, is from Atlanta, which not that matters, but I think a lot of people are definitely more so behind Anthony Edwards to take this crown and this mantra of being the face of the league. But Luka, to me, maybe you have a different opinion. I think Luka obviously has a great argument to be the best player in the league at this point. What we've seen this season. What is your thoughts on that? Do you think this series, or do you think one of these players is going to be the next face of the league, or do you think it'll still be a guy like Giannis or Jokic here for the next couple of years?
I think when it comes to face of the league, I don't think the face of the league is always the best player. I think in between the two, Luka and Ant, I think there's no question that Luka is probably the better player. This is somebody who's been putting up insane stats ever since he stepped in the league, and so I think
Not
when
to
you
cut you off, not to cut you off, but if Ant and them win this series in, let's say, 5 games, even though Luka's hurt in 5 games, do you think Ant will technically be considered a better player than Luka Doncic?
I won't think so because I think people going into this, people know Luka is hurt and they know what type of team that. I mean, it wasn't just Anthony Edwards that just beat the Nuggets in 7. It was Rudy Gobert hitting turnarounds. It was Cat playing
Oh my
aggressive.
gosh, that was a
Jaden
crazy shot.
McDaniels playing good. Like I think people will generally feel like. I mean, at least if you watch the Timberwolves, throughout the playoff run, they sweep Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. They take the defending champs to 7 and come back from 20. I think it wouldn't be a surprise if the better team, like if people looked at it and said, "Oh, the Ant just had the better team."
Yeah.
I think that's what the case would be. And talking about the face of the league, I think that if if I think generally the face of the league isn't always the best. I think it's not always the best player. It's most marketable, especially for the league. And I feel like with Anthony Edwards, and you're saying, oh, he's in Michael Jordan, or this is somebody who doesn't play any games. I think people will gravitate towards his kind of like personality and energy versus somebody like Luka, who obviously is insane on the court. But we all know what the thing is with Luka. He complains too much. He
Yeah.
does too much, like sometimes like that. So I think that people will probably gravitate towards more towards like Anthony Edwards, almost just how like people were gravitating towards Ja before all that, before he got suspended and everything, where it was it's parading inside my city type of things like that. I think
That was a great time. That was a great time.
I think that Anthony Edwards will be a little bit more marketable than Luka, especially because I mean you see him in how many commercials is he in just during the games? It's
Oh,
like
that's
he's in like
Luka.
5 or 6. His
Yeah.
shoe, especially, I think his shoe coming out and being popular is really helping him too. So I think he has a lot of like media things that are going for him right now that are already pushing him toward to be the face of the league.
Yeah, and I think the NBA really wanted it to be Tatum, and I think the
Yeah,
media outlets have pushed it to be Tatum for a long time because best
yeah.
player on one of the most decorated franchises and teams. It just has it, I think Anthony Edwards just has that it factor, which puts him over the top. But again, I'm still of the
I,
belief Luka might be the best player in the league, and I think I might stand on that. But going into next year, interesting conversation between Giannis, Jokic, and Luka here, if you ask me. But
I will say real quick, not to cut you off, I will say I feel like we know how insane Jokic is. Obviously, 3 MVPs in 4 years. I feel like the league was almost trying. It's weird to say because of how great he is on the court. I feel like the league was kind of pushing way too hard into the Jokic being like the face of the
yeah,
league, or like the kind of like like I feel like they were trying to do too much around his personality. Like, oh, he's just coming in on it. Like the NBA is this part-time job. He wants to go back and race horses, which
the
is all cool,
horseman.
like which could be the truth. But I think that they were really looking for like like a European player to kind of like like a foreign player, like how like Giannis was, I think, easily marketable. I
Yeah,
think people generally don't like Joel Embiid, especially after these playoffs and all the foolishness he does. So I think Jokic is kind of like that next European player after Jokic or Luka, and I feel like that's where that marketability was coming from with him, even though it probably isn't going to work out like the way the league thinks. I think that's just another player they were pushing too.
Yeah, I think when you have the combination of being the best player in the league and the most marketable, that's when you're GOAT status. And we've only seen that
Yeah.
a couple of times when you have Magic and Bird, and then you have LeBron, for a period of time after Jordan, of course, was the face of the league. Kobe in that conversation for a couple of years. I'm sure
Yeah.
you can have him there as well. When you have the combination of the two, that's kind of when you're the GOAT status because it's one thing to be the face of the league, like you mentioned, being marketable, but it's another thing to be the best player. And of course, we've only seen that happen, the combination of it, just a few times in history.
I'll
But
probably even throw young Kevin Durant in there, like a
Kevin Durant,
younger OKC Kevin Durant too.
he,
Steph.
he was out there making those movies. What was it? Thunderstruck? What was that
Yeah.
movie?
Yeah. Wow,
Terrible
that is
movie.
a crazy throwback.
But your thoughts here before we close out this Western Conference. You know where I'm going because I've been behind the one team all season long in preseason. But what is your prediction here in the Western Conference Finals and in how many games?
So I said I was going to take the Timberwolves in 6 games, and I said that it would be 6 games because of Luka and Kyrie. I think Luka and Kyrie get you 2 games off of this, and that's just me assuming that they're going to play up to their usual level of greatness. Obviously Kyrie had some games last round where he didn't have crazy stats games, but he played really good on defense, and we all know Luka's banged up, but. I think that if they come in with the mindset we need to take the offense upon us, and they're both getting about 20 to 30 apiece, I feel like that's 2 games off of this Timberwolves team who outside of Ant and Cat, and Cat isn't always consistent. Neither, and to this point, Ant doesn't really always have the most consistent games ever. I think his impact is a little bit better. But if they can say we just got to take 2 games off of these guys, I think it can happen. I really do.
Yeah.
But with that being said, this Timberwolves team showed everybody who they are versus the Nuggets, and this is a team that went up 2-0, lost 3 straight, and had to win 2 straight against the defending champs. Not to mention in that game 7, they were down 20 points at one point. This is a team that's it's crazy because going into the conference finals, they're probably about as battle tested as any non-champion has probably ever been. I mean, you like I mentioned before, you can face a team with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. Obviously, that depth isn't always there, but that's 3 elite scorers. Then you go play the defending champs, and now you play a team with arguably a top 3 to 5 player in the league, maybe top 1, and you make one of the best secondary role play, not a role player, but secondary star players in the league right now. So this will be a good series, but I say Timberwolves in 6.
Yeah, it's definitely a battle between heart and mind because my mind tells me that this is a team that, like you mentioned, is more battle tested than anybody at this point in the playoffs, and they're fresh. They're not beat up like some of these teams, like the Dallas Mavericks, and they haven't had that as hard of a road facing guys like Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and then the reigning champions. But for the simple fact that I before the season, we came onto this podcast, we made some predictions on what's a team that, not a lot of people are looking at, but they could win it all. I said the Dallas Mavericks. Now, that was before the additions of Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington. But in that video, I said, hey, they just need a couple solid bigs, which was the consensus. And then they can be legit. They can make a deep push. But I'm going to go with the fact that they have the best player in the series and that that they have 2 of my favorite players of all time, that they're going to be able to get over the top here against this defensive, I mean, top to bottom, probably the best constructed roster left in basketball outside of the Celtics. But for in this series, it's weird because when you look at the Timberwolves, they're a team that they're going to have what? Jaden McDaniels on Luka Doncic, and then you're going to have Anthony Edwards on Kyrie Irving.
Yeah.
We've seen in this playoffs the games that the Mavericks have lost, again, whether against the Clippers or the Thunder, it's because of the fact that Luka Doncic and Kyrie had an off quarter. And after that, they get down by so much in that one quarter where the team that they're facing just pulls away, and they pull away by a lot. And unless they have some second half magic, the Mavericks team doesn't have enough to come back. They cannot have an off quarter in the series. Either, if Luka has an off quarter, Kyrie better go off, and vice versa. Because if they both have an off quarter, pack it up. Get ready for the next game because the Timberwolves are just too deep and too talented to not capitalize on those opportunities, especially because I can't imagine the confidence they have at the moment beating the defending champs the way they did. But
Yeah.
I'm going to go with my heart, and I'm going to go with the Mavericks in 6. Hopefully they can continue this Mavericks in 6 trend, and they advance to the NBA Finals. I would just love to see Luka at that stage, of course, next to Kyrie, who I have a bobblehead of. But that is my prediction here. Going against the grain a little bit, I'm sure if I'm as a betting degenerate, I'm probably going to bet on the Timberwolves. But, I'll go with my heart here. But as a betting degenerate as well, I'll tell you one team I'm going to bet on. It's the Boston Celtics. This is a team that on the season, Bakari, is 72-20. Absolutely insane. There's no other team that sniffs 70 wins. And they're, like, as you see here against the Pacers, they have 17 more total wins on the year than the Indiana Pacers. Absolutely insane. But on the regular season, this is the Boston Celtics team that was 64-18. The only team that beat them multiple times was the Indiana Pacers. This is a team that gets up and down. They like to run. And, of course, the Pacers, like we talked about last week, they have the most range on a game-to-game basis because of how many points they score. And as we saw in Game 7 against the Knicks, They just had the best historic shooting team performance in a Game 7 in NBA history. That is what the Pacers are capable of on a game-to-game basis. Your thoughts about this series? The Pacers have the number 1 offense in this postseason, but the Celtics have the number 2 offense and the number 3 defense. Your thoughts about the Pacers here in this overall series as a whole?
Yeah, ideally this, we all know the Celtics. The Celtics play down to their competition, and with that being said, the Pacers already have multiple games against them. Have already beat them multiple times this season, and you could this. The Celtics seems to be a team that you say, yeah, they lost in the regular season, but this is the playoffs. They flipped that switch. Sometimes it really doesn't look like the Celtics really flipped that switch at all. I mean, even going back to the Cavs series, they went in 5, but the last 2 games, if you don't look at that final score and just watch the last 2 games are about 3.5 quarters, maybe three quarters, all the way through to about 2 minutes left. Those are really close games against pretty much a G League roster, against a team that had no business being there at that point in time due to injuries. Same thing with the Miami Heat, even though the Heat got 1 game and shot historically to do it. This is a Pacers team who, the Bucks weren't at their best, and the Knicks weren't at their best. Jalen Brunson even gets hurt game 7. Josh Hart, OG only played 5 minutes into the game. So when you look at it, it's like, they just happen to be here. But at the same time, this is a team who had the best shooting percentage ever in a game 7. Like, this is a team who can really just light it up from all areas of the floor. And with that being said, other than Ben Mathurin, they don't really have a whole bunch of injuries. This is a team that's been playing with the same, guys on the court for when did Ben Mathurin get hurt? Like March, February, something already around there.
Unfortunately,
so, yeah. So, this is a team that if any team can get it done, obviously they're here for a reason to do that.
Again, I mean, they can, in a series basis, of course, it's the NBA. Anybody can beat anybody. But I mean this when I say the Pacers can legitimately beat anybody in a 7-game series because of how many points they score. And of course, if they get just enough stops, of course, that'll put them over the top. But as we take a look at their lineups here, of course, I should have explained this with the first matchup, but the green, of course, is the positional advantage on a player basis. The red is the best player in the series. The Celtics, for being such a complete lineup, you have an argument that they only, it's an even split here between as far as when you include the starting 5 and the head coach. You can make an argument, is Joe Mazzulla better than Rick Carlisle? Maybe, maybe not. I gave the edge to the veteran coach that's been there.
Trash.
I just gave the edge to the coach that's been there, done that, and led the Mavericks to the NBA Finals. What a storyline that would be if the Pacers and Mavericks would be in the finals, even though that would be a nasty finals matchup. Indiana and Dallas, right? But again, what a storyline that would be. But overall, I guess I'll ask you this. Who's going to be the X factor in this series? To me, I think it's Drew Holiday. Of course, Derek White, he's going to have his games. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, we know they're going to have their games. I think Drew Holiday, throughout this first 2 rounds, has been the defender, but offensively, he's only had like 1 or 2 games where he's been in double figures. I think if Drew Holiday can give them that extra punch offensively, I think, again, not only are they going to win this series, but they're going to win it pretty quickly. And of course, his defense, even if his offense isn't there, his defense on Tyrese Halliburton is going to be the deciding factor in the series. So I'm going to go Drew Holiday as my X factor. But your thoughts? Who's the X factor in this series for you?
Now, this is going to sound crazy to say because this person is probably going to make an all-NBA team. This is somebody who was an all-star starter. But I'm actually going to say Tyrese Halliburton. And my reasoning is going to probably make it a little bit sense. Tyree, this is the first series he's walking into where the other team is going to have not just one person to guard him, but multiple people to guard him. Whether that's Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown switches onto him, Jason Tatum, Al Horford is probably one of the better bigs in the league at perimeter defense. And, this Celtics team, when you really watch them lock in on defense, it is probably one of the best things to watch because I'm telling you, just seeing it from the Cleveland series, when you try to, you try and get a matchup through pick and rolls, I remember Darius Garland had the ball 1 possession and he went from Drew to Derek to Jason Tatum to Jaylen Brown into Al Horford and still didn't get a shot. Yeah. And I think obviously, this Pacers team does have Pascal Siakam and Miles Turner, but still, Tyrese is walking into a situation where none of the other two teams he played before maybe even had a single person to guard him. But OG got hurt, and those are two injury plagued teams by the time they got to him. This is, like I said, this is a complete roster the Celtics have. Tyrese Halliburton won't be able to afford those games where he only has like 9 points and 6 assists with 5 turnovers, because the Celtics will jump on that opportunity if he has just even one of those games. I feel like the series could be in jeopardy by that point.
Yeah.
So Tyrese Halliburton is my X factor, and that's why.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, when we talk about the Celtics, what makes them part of what makes them great is that they can let their star players rest on defense. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, because they have, Horford, Holiday, and White. But for the Pacers, I'm interested to see, they might be able to do the same thing, because last series, of course, they had Neesmith and Nembhard guarding, of course, Jalen Brunson and Dante DiVincenzo.
You're
If
getting
those
cooked.
guys, well, yeah, I'm just saying, if they could do a decent job on Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, maybe that makes it interesting, maybe. But again, Tyrese is still going to have to deal with one of those five guys, and Pascal the same way, because of course Drew Holiday, they put on big sometimes, and same thing with
Yeah,
Derek White.
he's really good at it. They're both really good at that too.
It's frustrating as Cavs fans that I'll say this: if this Celtics team, because we've seen this conversation going around, and of course we've seen Draymond's thoughts, just your quick thoughts here. If the Celtics don't win the NBA Finals this year, is it time to make a big trade? Obviously, the season's a failure because it's championship or bust. But is it time to trade Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum if they don't win it all this year?
I think you keep the team together because they're always going to have the opportunity, the chance to do it. At that point, though, I think Jason Tatum, like I feel like Jason Tatum will definitely have that kind of that thing in the league where people don't really take him seriously, don't really say that
Yeah.
he can get it done when it matters, doesn't really say he has that like dog in him. I actually, just as of right now, I think Jaylen Brown has I guess a little bit more dog in him than
Yeah.
Jason Tatum does. I mean,
Especially this
every time they
postseason.
lose, Jason Tatum's like, oh, well, I mean, it's not like we're never going to lose. Like, he doesn't really own up to the fact that they lost. Jaylen Brown will at least, say, oh, we're going to win next game, and go out and do it. So I don't know if you do a big trade, because who do you trade for? I mean, you probably have
Yeah.
everybody that you can get. You have you have a superstar, all-star borderline superstar player in Jaylen Brown. You have a superstar role player in Derek White. You have a former champion, former NBA All-Star in Drew
Yeah.
Holiday. You have a former All-Star in Al Horford, former All-Star in Kristaps Porzingis. It's like, what more do you need to win a championship, especially in a watered down East? So, I don't, like I said, I don't know what trade you look into at that point, but I think Joe Mazzulla will be gone. I think I think there will be some serious conversations around Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, just what type of players they're going to be known as, especially after their careers. I think
Eh,
that's going to happen.
What's crazy is we'll talk about him later, but I put together these lineups, and I probably should have put Kristaps. This Celtics team is so loaded that I forgot about Kristaps Porzingis when I put these lineup screens together. That shows you how talented this team is. But last question about this series before we get into the predictions: if Jason Tatum does get it done, if he does, win this final, well, I guess I'll ask you kind of a combination here. What do you want to see from Tatum? Because to me, I think, for legacy and just for this franchise, I think not only he has to come out and win these games and win the NBA Finals, but he has to be the best player. And I think, right now it's been Jaylen Brown in this postseason run, or even
Are you?
Derek White for a stretch of games. We need to see Tatum be that top 5 level player for, from now until the end of the playoffs. And hopefully it starts tonight in game 1. But your thoughts here, what do you want to see from Tatum? And if he wins, do you think he's kind of a top 5 player in the world?
I think Jason Tatum has an underrated overall game. I think when you look at his stats at the end of every game, you're like, oh, I didn't know he had 12 rebounds. I didn't know. I mean, it didn't feel like he had 23 points. It didn't feel like he had 8 assists to go with all of that,
Right.
in a steal and 2 blocks. It really didn't. But because when you watch him, he kind of does it so nonchalantly, or kind of just like it's almost like
He plays in the flow of the offense. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it's almost like, how people like criticize LeBron for making the right play every time. It's like Jason Tatum plays within the offense. He just knows how to get his out of that. And in like you mentioned, Jaylen Brown sometimes takes matters into his own hands, and so it looks more dominant. Derek White sometimes too. He'll say, "Oh, let me get a pick and roll." He'll shoot a deep three or deep threes and make them. I think Jason Tatum needs to come out and be aggressive and get his own shot. That's not always an off. I think he needs to take smart shots too. He doesn't always take smart shots. And I think that's a thing that really hurts his shooting percentage, especially. I think if he could take smart, easy shots, just take what the defense gives him every single possession, he's going to look like the best player in not only this series, but probably the finals and in probably the world by that point. Not the entire world, but just like the stage that it's set on. So I think Jason Tatum just needs to take smart shots and continue to play his overall game. And I think that it'll start to reflect on what type of player he is and what he means to the Celtics teams, because there are going to be those games where Jaylen Brown doesn't play up to his standard and
Right.
Derek White doesn't, play like a superstar role player, and Drew Holiday won't be there. So I think Jason Tatum in those games will really shine and show the type of player he can be.
I think big series for number 0 in Boston. Before we get to the predictions here, breaking news: the Lakers think that JJ Redick has Pat Riley-like potential. I'm just going to leave that there, and we're going to continue on here. Bakari, I kind of spoiled it here, but your prediction, you have the Celtics in 6. Why is that?
Because they play down to their opponent. The Pacers got two games off of them in the regular season, and when I thought about it, the Heat and the Cavs both got a game off of the Celtics.
Game 2. Coincidentally.
And honestly, I think the Cavs probably would have got one more if they weren't hurt. So I think that series would have went 6. So I think you just put a slightly better. You just put a team that's not injured and has their Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal aren't hurt. Miles Turner isn't hurt. I think you put a team that's for the most part outside of Ben Mathurin fully healthy going into it. I think this is definitely a team that gets 2, especially because we know what they're capable of. Like I said, it'll be an uphill battle, and those 2 might come in the final seconds of like a controversial call or something like that.
Right.
They'll get 2. After each of those 2 losses, the Celtics will bounce back and probably blow them out the next game. But the Pacers will definitely get 2 just due to the Celtics' inability to really lock in and dominate for a multi-game stretch, or even we've seen it. How many times have we seen the Celtics kind of like blow up a lead and have to pretty much defend it at the end of the game?
All the time.
Exactly. So I don't want to say it comes from coaching, but
yeah, it's scary to think that this team, if they locked in for all 48 minutes, they could have probably approached 68, 69 wins on the season. But of course, they, just like you touched on everything perfectly. They play down to their competition. But one thing we know about the Celtics team is that they're going to start off with a win tonight, and they're going to lose game 2 at home and make this series interesting as we head back to Indiana. Now, Indiana has been one of the best home teams. I don't think they've lost at home this entire postseason. So something to keep in mind here as we go on here. Because they lost 2 games in Milwaukee, and of course they were able to close it out at home in the first series. And of course, last series, the home team won every game but game 7. The Pacers, interesting to see, but I will say that whether if it's game 2 or game 3, they'll grab a game here. But the Celtics, I'm just hoping that Jason Tatum locks in and this team does not play down to the Pacers level. The last couple things that I want to do, I want to go through some power rankings, but then I'll also really quickly I want to go through some players here, some top 10 players here that are left on all 4 of these teams combined. I have some honorable mentions on the screen. Now, what I did for these top 10 players is I did not who's having the best playoff run, not who's having the best 2024. It's a combination of everything. So if I was ranking every single player on these 4 teams, who were the top 10 guys? That is basically what I came down to. Some honorable mentions just from every team. These are just guys, again, from every team, not exactly in order. PJ Washington, great postseason run. Jaden McDaniels, even Mike Conley can make this list. Drew Holiday and Derek White missed the list, even with their defensive prowess. And Miles Turner, of course, another guy like TJ McConnell with his postseason run, of course, would have been on the list, but it's not based on the postseason. Excuse me here, as of course it's allergy season, and of course, I guess after 21 years, Bakari, I finally got allergies.
Welcome to the club.
Moving into the top 10. Rudy Gobert, the 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, the only other players to do that. Ben Wallace and Dikembe Mutombo. Rudy Gobert, like I mentioned, is the X factor in this series for me. Depending on how he plays, I think this Timberwolves team can dominate in the Western Conference Finals. But at number 9 is Kristaps Porzingis when he's fully healthy. Again, not this postseason run. As an overall player, I have Kristaps above him for the simple fact that he also brings you that defensive ability. Maybe not the rebounding ability of a guy like Rudy Gobert, but he also gives you that offensive punch, that guy that can eat. Sure, he's not maybe he's not on this level of Rudy Gobert, but he's right here as a defender. But offensively, he's also giving you 20 points, shooting 40% from three, stretching the floor for stars, whatever team he's on, whether if it was Russell Westbrook in Washington, or whether if it was now here in Boston, of course, with all the talented offensive pieces they have. He brings the defense, but he also gives you that extra offensive punch. Maybe that's a hot take, but I think Kristaps as a player is better than Rudy Gobert. 7B, I could not decide between these two, and we talked about it off the show. Karl-Anthony Towns. Again, for years that he was this chosen one. The GM said, if we had to start a franchise, it's Karl-Anthony Towns as our go-to guy. And over the last 8 years or so, this team has tried to run the offense and run the team through Karl-Anthony Towns. Now, we've seen a refined version of him this postseason run where we talked about it. Maybe the best overall version of Cat that we've seen in his career, even though he's not the go-to guy anymore. But at number 7A, this is a guy that has a similar role on his team, but maybe to a higher degree because they don't have the other pieces around him. But the Indiana Pacers, because it's right now, he's the go-to scorer on this team. And in that last round against the Knicks, he turned it back up because in the first round, he had 2 good games and then fell off the planet Earth here for the last 4 against the Milwaukee Bucks. But in this series against the Knicks, he really took over and he was the go-to guy for this Pacers team. And his defense was there as well. This is a proven winner, and I couldn't really decide who's the better player behind Pascal and Karl-Anthony Towns. I'm leaning past Karl-Anthony Towns, but again, it's very, very close between these two. So I just had them at 7A and 7B here. I'm struggling through, but stick with me. Jaylen Brown here at number 6. I have him here just because of his two-way ability. And again, in moments of time, he can take over and he can be the best player on this Celtics team. Of course, he is a great two-way player for this team, and he can be the guy to take the pressure off of Jason Tatum and the other guys on his team to go out there and carry them to a win on any given night. So he's at number 6. We had to reset there because my allergies, of course, are worse than ever. So as I struggle here, Bakari, what are your thoughts on the honorable mentions and the 10 through 6? Would there be anybody you would interchange here or swap spots?
No, I don't think so. I think this is a pretty solid list, but that's also with me only knowing 6 through 10. Like everybody else, it'll be 1 through 5 will be revealed to me shortly. But yeah, you hit a spot on. Karl-Anthony Towns, he's obviously had more stats wise more productive seasons than Pascal, especially back when the Timberwolves weren't really anything. But Pascal, like you said, is a proven winner. He's a champ. So this is, and he has numbers to back it up as well. So I don't disagree with you there between them being in the same tier. Like I said, Jaylen Brown at 6. I wonder who's 1 through 5. But everything, Rudy being at 10, everything makes sense to me so far. So
yeah, let me say this. There's one Pacers player. Oh, I can't give that away. I can't give that away. But at number 5, I gave that away because he is here at number 5. Tyrese Haliburton, of course, was the first time All-Star this year, but if not, this is a guy that at one point was considered to be an All-NBA guard for the first half of the season. Before that leg injury came into play, he was dominating teams on a night-to-night basis. He took a little dip in production. The team fell off just a little bit as far as winning-wise, but they've had a great postseason run, knocking off the Bucks, knocking off the Knicks, 2 great defensive teams in their own right. Well, when healthy, the Bucks are fully great, or they're good defensively. But now they face their biggest test yet in the Boston Celtics. I'm expecting a big series from Tyrese Haliburton, but just a playmaker and the leader that he is, I think he's special, and I think he's entered that top 25 conversation, maybe even top 20. I'd have to see where I had him in the preseason. But at number 4, might be controversial, but again, the role on your team doesn't always mean that you're a worse player. And hopefully that makes sense. Because I have Kyrie Irving at number 4. I think when we compare, again, player to player, Kyrie brings more I guess not, he doesn't bring more because of his role, but I think he's an overall better player. This is a guy that has refined his defensive ability. He's been playmaking out of his mind this year. And of course, we all know the scorer and creator that Kyrie Irving is. He's a go-to guy on any team in the NBA. And that's saying something because not everybody can say that. Kyrie Irving is one of the most talented, and again, you can argue, the most talented player we've ever seen on a basketball court. That is how talented and how deep his bag is offensively. I get it. Maybe you want to make the argument that Tyrese has more on his shoulders on a year-to-year basis. I understand that. You can make the argument that Tyrese brought his team further in the playoffs than Kyrie as a leader ever did. But from a player perspective. I think Kyrie is just a little bit higher to me. Maybe it's my bias coming in the way, but your thoughts about that? Is Tyrese Halliburton or Kyrie Irving the better player? Again, I'll say this. To me, I don't think your role on your team makes you a better player. Jordan Poole is not a better player than Jaylen Brown, even though Jordan Poole has a much bigger role and workload on his, on his plate.
I honestly, I was really sitting there trying to think like, so you say you're taking everything into consideration, right?
The last like year and a half or so, yeah. I mean, just like recency bias, I guess. Not recency bias, but the last year and a half or so.
So with that being said, even in the last year and a half, is Tyrese better than Jaylen Brown during that entire stretch? Like, you know what I mean? I think he had that stretch where he was obviously the better player, but even then, is that even half of is that enough of that stretch to say to me to say like he's better than
and that's definitely a great argument, and that's something where 4 through 6 I battled with, making these rankings. Going into the season, I had Tyrese Halliburton at 25. I just checked, but I had Jaylen Brown at 18. So I had him as a way better player going into the year, and like you mentioned, and you actually make a great point. He probably should be top 5 because of the fact that he gives you that two-way ability, and he's a better scorer and creator. Well, not creator, but scorer than a guy like Tyrese Halliburton. That's a great argument there. It's something that I battled with.
And like I know with Jaylen Brown, the thing is he's the number 2 on the team, but he's also, I mean, he was the best player in the finals 2 years ago when they made it. He has the stats to back him up. So it's what he took that offensive jump about 2021 ish.
Yeah,
2020 brought the bubble.
You can argue before that, yeah.
Yeah, so and since then, I mean, he's been consistent in the stats he's putting up, and I guess the flaw in his game last year was he didn't have an offhand, and he got better at it.
I can promise you that didn't play a part in doing these here today.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I get that, and I'm not mad at Tyrese being over him because Tyrese is the controller of the offense. He usually has the best perimeter defender on him. I was just making an argument for Jaylen Brown because Jaylen Brown, you got to go into it each night and game plan around who you want your best perimeter defender to be on, Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, and then that completely flip by the end of the night. You could have your best defender on Jaylen Brown and just throw a bigger body on Jason Tatum and say, well, Jaylen Brown's the one that's hurting us.
My only question to you, my rebuttal to that, and I think this is why I had Tyrese just one spot above. Do you think Jaylen Brown could be the best player on a team to go to the Eastern or Western Conference Finals?
I think he could be the best player to go on a team that goes to conference finals when the two teams before them were at probably 55%. I get it. It's you play who's in front of you because I mean the Celtics have done the same thing this year. You play who's in front of you and there are going to be injuries, but I mean, I can't help it. The Knicks had 4 to 5 players hurt. You probably throw 7 in there. Jalen Brunson broke his hand. Josh Hart, Mitch Robb,
Bojan Bogdanovic.
Bojan, Julius Randle. I'm forgetting somebody. There's 6
Basically,
in there.
They had to rely on Alec Burks to be an offensive punch down the stretch.
Exactly. I mean, you had Dante D looking like an all-star. If you like an all-star
version
playing like that. Same thing as Josh Hart. And even in that Bucks series, like Giannis was hurt, and then Dame missed a game or two. So like you play who's in front of you, but I can't help but think that if Jaylen Brown was in that same, if he did, like say he did this past offseason, decline that extension and go to a team like Houston or something like that, and Houston played like or maybe not Houston, but like he goes to the Nets, and the Nets have like a few different pieces around him because they were game planning for having Jaylen Brown, and then he plays like the Heat without Jimmy and without Bam, and then he plays I don't know, like the Cavs without Donovan, and I feel like it
the cards right, yeah.
I feel like it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for him to do that. And going into the Kyrie and Tyrese thing, like I feel like I know where you're coming from with that Kyrie and Tyrese debate. Kyrie is the better defender as of right now, but I guess my argument with Kyrie being even him being a defender now is I feel like he didn't really tap into that until like the postseason, towards the end of the season.
No, he didn't.
Like he wasn't doing that during the regular season. And I know this is taking everything into consideration, including the playoffs. So I I'm not mad at 4 and 5, Kyrie being 4 and Tyrese being 5, I
So
guess.
my understanding is you would add probably Jaylen Brown, Kyrie, and then Tyrese.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, with the two-way ability, it's
Well,
hard to argue against it. But
yeah. Like I feel like for the most part, as of right now, Kyrie and Tyrese are kind of interchangeable, as crazy as that sounds. I feel like I wouldn't be mad at either. Like if you told me Kyrie was 5 and Tyrese was 4, I also wouldn't be mad at that because, like
right.
you mentioned, Tyrese did have that stretcher. We saw how crazy he could play.
Yeah.
I just probably would put Jaylen Brown above both of them.
I ruined that list. But we talked about it there. Again, like, the biggest reason between four through six and everybody on this list is like, Jordan Poole has a bigger workload. Kyle Kuzma has a bigger workload than a guy like, let's say, I don't know, Jaylen Brown, right? Because they are I guess, the 1A on their team, but that doesn't make them the better player. And I hopefully, people understand that. But when we get into these top three, these are the guys on their team. These are the best three players in the playoffs, undoubtedly, at least in my opinion, because all three of these guys, well, two of the three are two-way players, and one of them is just so good offensively that, of course, he's one of the best players in the league. But when we get into this top three, at number three, Jason Tatum. It was really an argument between 2 and 3. Number 1 to me was set in stone. We kind of know who that is at this point in time. To me, Jason Tatum came into the year the way better player. I had him higher in my rankings. And the reason he's number 3 is because of the fact that I think this postseason run, or this final stretch, will prove to me who the better player is between Jason Tatum and Anthony Edwards. It's one thing for Jason Tatum to ride on the coattails of how talented his overall team is and to go and win the finals. It's another thing to be the reason your team wins the finals. And to me, if Jason Tatum can go out there in this postseason run and be the best player and win the finals as the best player, he's going to be better than number 2. No doubt about it going into the next season. But number 2, he's been on a historic run, taking down his idol, then taking down the consensus best player in the league. I'm going to throw it up there in Anthony Edwards. The only reason Anthony Edwards is over there above me, maybe it's the recency bias, but I haven't seen Jason Tatum be the guy on a team that has knocked off the talent, the level of talented teams like the Suns in round 1. Like Anthony Edwards didn't even let them get a game in round 1. Then he knocks off the defending champs. Jason Tatum has had good playoff runs, but when has he had that murderer's row of teams to start a postseason run? I don't know if he's ever had that. And Anthony Edwards, to me, again, it's close, but both of them are two-way players. Both of them can go out there and get you 25 to 30 a night. I just like Anthony Edwards a little bit better. Again, could be recency bias. And then at number 1 is Luka Doncic. To me, no doubt, a top 3 player in the world. Who's in that third spot? You can argue between Steph, Giannis, Anthony Edwards if you want to go that far this early. But to me, I think it's really a conversation between Jokic and Luka at this point. And to me, Luka, even if he's 80% of what it once was, I saw a stat that said this past series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, he put up like 27 and a half, 10 and 8. And that was his worst statistical postseason playoff series in his career. Only like Jokic and LeBron have had those series in their careers in totality. We haven't, an off season, I'll say this, an off series for this guy is still top 3 level in the league. An off series for this guy is a career series for a guy like Jason Tatum. So your thoughts here about this top 5? What, especially number 2 and 3. Am I jumping the gun with Anthony Edwards? Should Tatum be above him at this point? Or does Anthony Edwards already jump the gun? Or is he the best player on this list?
No, I think 2 and 3 are perfect where they are because, like you mentioned, Jason Tatum has had good playoff runs, but even once he's been to the highest level, it feels like he doesn't always like he didn't deliver in the finals.
Right.
Other times when they lose, it's like he's not there. Like they go deep down 3-0 to the Heat last year, and then they forced a game 7. And I know he got hurt, but he didn't even like he really shouldn't even been on the court. He was probably hurting the team more than he was helping them.
Right.
I think with Anthony Edwards, the thing is too, we're seeing like it's funny because I remember watching him in they played the Grizzlies 2 years ago, and this is still around the time where they were running the team through Cat when they were still everything was going through Cat. You give the ball to him at the start of possession at the top of the key, and then he's either doing a handoff to somebody, pick and fade or something around there. And it was kind of evident then that Anthony Edwards was probably the best chance they had at beating that Grizzlies team. And that was Anthony Edwards who was shooting probably mid to low 30% from 3. Wasn't taking the best shots, but you could just see he could get it done. we're watching an Anthony Edwards who, yeah, he just did shoot 6 of 24 in that game 7, but that was his only off game in 7 games. Like every other game, he shot the ball really well. And it's like, as I've been, I've been I've been on Anthony Edwards train since before
You
the
have.
draft even. This is the best that I've seen him shoot, like by far. This is far, like it's almost surprising to me that he's shooting the ball as well as he is. Whether that is his post game is really good right now, and he's 22. His pull up 3 game is really good right now. And the thing about Jason Tatum and Anthony Edwards, and like I said, Jason Tatum has an underrated overall game. He does the right things, and he is a two-way player. Anthony Edwards on defense, he could be like, what if you had to say top 10 perimeter defenders? He's definitely top 10. He's probably
I
top
think,
5
yeah,
perimeter
yeah.
defender.
Well, I won't say top 5, but he's definitely on that list.
Top 10, yeah, top 10, top 5. And that's everything he does on offense as well. Jason Tatum, I mean, wing defenders, but like again, that's up for debate. Jason Tatum is 6'8", 225, 230, something around there, so maybe even 6'10". Anthony Edwards is doing this at 6'4", 220-ish. So I think you're not jumping the gun on that Anthony Edwards, Jason Tatum take. But like you said, that's just where they are right now. There also is room for Jason Tatum to jump all the way up to number 1 on the entire list. So that's why I'm not mad at having Anthony Edwards at 2, because there is room for him to grow. He's only 22. Jason Tatum, we know what he can do, but it's just, will he do that and rise to the occasion?
Yeah, I have to go back and see where I had Anthony Edwards on my top 50 list going into last season. I cannot wait. I want to see how, of course I want basketball to be here, but he's got to be a top 10 player at this point in time. Who leaves the list? That's the biggest question. Of course, Devin Booker was in my top 10 last year. He's going to leave the list. But outside of that, guys like Shea make a great argument. Anthony Edwards make a great argument. Someone's going to have to leave the list. And that might be, maybe, again, it would have to be a player like LeBron or AD. It's hard to imagine.
What about even players like who aren't in the playoffs anymore? Jalen Brunson's playoff run was special.
Yeah, he's got to be.
Donovan Mitchell was insane up until he got hurt. 50 game 6 and
here. I mean, if I go take a quick look, over at my list last year, I'm assuming the top 5 was Jokic, Giannis, Luka, Steph, and Kevin Durant. I believe was in my top 5. I'm gonna go back and look here. But again, I mean, this is terrible podcasting. But again, if you guys get this far into the episode, just stick with me here for about 20 or 5 to 10 seconds here as I try my best here to hurry up and find this exact video. Here we go. Let me go out there and go to the end of my list.
Consider if you think Zion's going to be healthy next year, and you saw what he could do in that play-in game before he got hurt, and that team was down that game. He was bringing them back single-handedly. Him with Jose Alvarado with Trey Murphy and Herb Jones. Like even like a player like Zion, where we know what he can do. It's like a lot of these young players are kind of showing what they can do now. And it's actually fun to watch. I mean, even us being like Cavs fans, we were able to watch Evan Mobley actually look like the 3rd pick in the draft. It looked like he was playing at his draft level. Whether it was, I mean, really that entire series, pretty much. So
you know what's insane? Going into the season, I had Anthony Edwards in the tier of 41 to 50 as the best player in the league, and this dude is now consensusly going to be a top 10 guy. My top 10 last year was Jokic, Giannis, Curry, top 3, Luka, KD, Tatum at number 6, Embiid, AD, Bron, and Devin Booker round out my top 10. Outside of the top 10, you have guys like Jimmy Butler, Damian Lillard, Kawhi, Donovan Mitchell was at 14, and SGA was at 15. But like you mentioned, guys like D. Mitch, Shea have an argument to jump into that top 10. Devin Booker's going to fall out. Probably Bron or AD fall out of that top 10. But it's extremely hard to imagine who's going to fall out. Maybe Kevin Durant. But again, it's still Kevin Durant. I don't know. This list is going to look completely different. I can promise you Pascal is going to be a top 5 player. Or not Pascal, excuse me, Domantas Sabonis. The last thing I want to do here is just talk about some power rankings, and this is going to be really quickly. And how I've been doing these power rankings in the playoffs is looking at their path going to the NBA Finals and how likely are they to win the NBA Finals. So it's not who I think is the best team. It's a combination of who I think the best team is and their path. Who's most likely to win the NBA Finals. And number 4 is the Pacers, because they would have to go through the Celtics, and then arguably who most people think, whoever wins the Western side is going to win it all. that is definitely an argument in itself. But they would have to go through the Celtics in another probably 6 to 7 games, and then they're gonna have to go to take on the Mavericks or the Timberwolves. I think it's very unlikely they can get that done. Another team that I think is very unlikely, even though I think they win the series in my in my delusion, the Dallas Mavericks, they'd have to beat a super deep roster in the Minnesota Timberwolves. Then they got to go beat a super deep roster in probably the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals. Luka's banged up. Kyrie has been on and off with his offensive punch. Are they going to be able to get enough from their role players outside of Kyrie and Luka if they have an off quarter? That's the biggest question. But when we look at their path, it's very unlikely they're going to be able to beat both of those teams in tough, grueling series here down the stretch. And number two is the Timberwolves, because again, you got to face Luka Doncic, maybe the best player in the world. A team that's probably going to take you to 6 games, and then you go to the finals and face the Boston Celtics, a team that you didn't have the greatest record against in the regular season. Again, it's a different game now in the postseason. But just saying that you got to beat the Mavericks, a tougher team than the Pacers, which the Celtics would have to beat, and then you go beat the Boston Celtics. It's hard to imagine. So the Celtics, again, you get to face maybe the worst team left in the playoffs, and then you get a team either in the Timberwolves or the Mavericks who are going to be banged up after a tough Western Conference Finals. Celtics, I think, have the easiest road here left in the postseason. And not to mention, they're still relatively fresh. Outside of Porzingis, they're healthy as well. So the Celtics here at the top of the list. Anything you would change here about these power rankings?
Not at all. I think this is spot on. I feel like every year the Celtics probably have one of the easier roads to the ring. Yeah. And they just never get. I mean, they got there 2 years ago, and then, like I said, Jason Tatum gets hurt in Game 7 last year. They shouldn't have even been down 3-0 to begin with. Actually, I thought we were on a crash course for a Celtics Nuggets championship like we were supposed to be last year. But obviously that didn't happen. So
that was my preseason pick. But I mean, again, that was chalk. That was pretty much. It was just like these teams are so good. I want to pick against them, but I can't.
Yeah, my dark horse, the Knicks are supposed to be here, but
every
single player that plays on that in that 7-man rotation got hurt. So GG's, I guess, Pacers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess you would learn after Derrick Rose tore his knee up and kept going downhill with his career. Maybe that would have been the turning point for Tibbs and his rotation tactics, but I guess not. That is going to do it here for episode 175. Everything NBA Conference Finals. We talked predictions. We did top 10 players. We did power rankings. And, of course, we did breakdowns and X factors. Again, everything NBA Conference Finals. Now, I do want to throw it out there. I should have touched on it at the beginning of the show. This Thursday, I have another live stream with Bleacher Report. I did it a couple weeks ago, and I talked about landing spots for Kevin Durant. I have no idea who the player is going to be. They're going to tell me like 30 minutes before the show, and I'm going to have to come up with some explanations for you guys. So I don't know if it's going to be Brandon Ingram, Donovan Mitchell. I don't know who it's going to be, right? But this Thursday at noon Eastern time, I have the live stream here with Bleacher Report. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If you're still listening, come out. It's going to be some fun, and it's going to be a lot better than that stream number 1. But Bakari, thank you for joining the show. Of course, we appreciate any of the time you ever make here for the show. On the road to 18,000 subscribers. Any last thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, it's always good being here. It's always cool to talk, whether I'm on a football pod, which I haven't been on in a while, but or a basketball pod. It's always cool because I remember when we used to go to your house, we didn't have the camera setups and we had the mic in between both of us looking off of one computer and looking at the slides there. So, it's crazy. It still blows my mind that I can, get my laptop, get into Zoom, and then
it's a lot more convenient. It's a lot more, especially after a little bit of a move there from you. But again, thank you for joining the show. And tomorrow we have some fantasy football content. Thursday, AFC North record predictions. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy. Get out of here.